Well, if we can't use biased sources, what can we use? I realize that's kind of a silly question, but it is one that I find myself asking when I hear people talk about the kinds of sources they're looking for when they're doing research. It is a noble and understandable mission to seek sources that are stripped of bias, that seek to provide only pure, neutral truth. And I can understand why a writer or even a conscientious citizen would look for those sources of information that aren't skewed by anyone's personal bias. But I think people generally misunderstand bias, whether that's students setting out to write their first research paper in college or even seasoned scientists with good heads on their shoulders. And as a result, they miss out on genuinely useful and reliable sources of information. So today we'll be talking about how you can separate opinion from bias and show you the things you can do when you know the difference. Often, when I talk about research in the classroom, I hear students say that the best kinds of sources are those that are free of bias. And I agree to a point. Biased sources aren't great. But then they tend to define a biased source as any source that has an opinion. They're determined to reject any information that comes from a source that isn't purely neutral. And it's there that I tend to disagree with them. For one, it wouldn't make any sense to say that it's okay to write a persuasive argument, but then forbid using any sources that try to do the same. You can't say opinions are bad and then work on sending your own out into the world. So on a fundamental level, saying that all opinions are biased would mean that anything you wrote that included your own opinion was biased garbage that should never have been written in the first place. And obviously that isn't true, even if it ends up being garbage for other reasons. I'm kidding. But in all seriousness, it's important to recognize that bias and opinion are different things. A person with an opinion is not necessarily a biased person, and you can comfortably and responsibly work with information that includes opinions. In fact, writers do it all the time. So, to see what I mean, here are 3 statements. Of course, the first statement is just a neutral one. It merely states facts. There is no debating the truth value of a statement that ice cream is made with cream and sugar. But the second 2 statements are obviously not neutral. But one merely states an opinion while the other is biased. And you probably don't need me to say which is which, but we're having fun, so I will anyway. Statement 2 is an opinion. The speaker here knows what they want, and they express it. Statement 3 is biased. It is a position that is unwilling to listen to other ideas or evidence. The opinion is reasonable. It comes from considering possibilities, weighing them against each other, and adopting a position. We can even see, albeit in an abbreviated way, how the opinion was formed through the consideration of alternatives. Of course, this decision might not have come about through a strictly rational process, and that's okay. The speaker doesn't have to pick ice cream because it's the most cost-effective or the most likely to please the greatest number of people. It could just be that at the end of the day, it's what they like best. A decision can be motivated by emotions and still be reasonable. The key here is that this is a person we can work with. We might not agree with them, but we can recognize that they're a reasonable person. They've already shown that they're willing to listen to other ideas and consider better alternatives. But our biased friend sends no such message. They are intractable. They are unwilling to consider alternatives. They don't even want to hear other opinions. This is not a reasonable argument. This is bias. Rooting oneself to a position and then being totally unwilling to change no matter what. Bias is dangerous because it's not based in anything reasonable. It doesn't matter what good information is out there. A bias will deny, ignore, or manipulate truth, all in the name of defending that biased position. And that's a key difference. An opinion can be formed in good faith through good reasoning, but a bias will ignore everything except its original stance. So you can't work with a bias, but you can work with an opinion. So it's important to refuse bias because bias shuts down discussion and short-circuits the rhetorical process for finding the best course of action. A bias doesn't discuss anything or debate. It just screams and screams until people give in. But it's important not to throw out opinions when we're trying to avoid bias, because then we run the risk of missing out on really important and useful information. And to see what I mean, let's go back to those first 2 statements. It's true that the first communicates objective facts, and it's reasonable to say that the second doesn't. In fact, it's common to say that opinions are not facts, and when we mean that opinions do not reflect objective reality, that's a fair statement to make. But that's not to say that opinions don't tell us anything. Look again at that first statement. What do you know about the person who said it? Probably nothing at all. The neutral statement tells us some information, but it discloses nothing about the person we're dealing with. With the second statement, however, we get a clear picture of who we're dealing with. They're a thoughtful person who thinks ice cream is the best choice for a party. We might not know much about this person's biography, but we do know that we could probably have a productive conversation with them. The opinion, in other words, communicates valuable information that we just can't get when we stick with purely neutral informational sources. Neutral sources can give us facts, but they can't tell us anything about the people behind them. So neutral sources are valuable, but they're inherently limited. Somebody could be telling you just the facts while also hiding their true intentions. If we really want to understand a problem or issue and its implications for the way that we live our lives, we're going to need to understand the people involved, and the best way to do that is by listening to their opinions. Learning someone's opinion involves learning about their values and beliefs, and that's something that the facts alone could never give us. So opinions are facts, but with an asterisk. They reveal important information about the people we're dealing with in a way that purely neutral sources never could. And when you know that, you're in a great position to do some really meaningful things. I'm sure you remember, but in case you don't, a long time ago we talked about the key qualities of an effective thesis, the powerhouse of an argument. One of the key qualities of an effective thesis is that it's debatable. It doesn't just state an obvious fact, it talks about things that people can discuss and have different opinions on. And you just can't do that with neutral sources. If all you have is objective statistics and neutral reports on events, you may be able to form your own thesis, but it will be a thesis that's insulated from the social and rhetorical realities that would make your thesis valuable. Instead, when you include sources that have opinions but not biases, you're stepping into an ongoing conversation in order to find the best course of action. Essentially, you're doing what our ice cream friend did, considering all of the possibilities before weighing in with your own position. When you include sources with opinions in your own work, you not only make it more likely that you'll develop a compelling and worthwhile thesis, but you're also boosting your own credibility because you're showing that you've accounted for other people's viewpoints and considered them in the formation of your own. But there's more to it than that. When you give up the misguided search for purely neutral informational sources and learn how to deal with opinions, you become a much more competent consumer of all the media that gets hurled at us all the time. Understanding opinions and how they work will help you to read through the opinions that you run into. I think purely neutral sources are basically a fantasy, but that's not a problem if you understand the difference between opinions and bias and how to deal with them. Maybe it's just me, but I think the opinion section of a newspaper or website is the most interesting and probably most honest, way more than the so-called straight reporting. And this is exactly why. I'm not sure how useful it is to know that something has happened in the world. What's more important is to understand how people are going to respond. For example, a market crash can be an unfortunate fact, but the response, the opinion about that crash, has real implications. A fact can occur, but it's the response, the opinion, that can affect the quality of our life thereafter. Facts can shape what we know, but opinions can shape how we live. When you recognize that, you're in a better position to recognize that just shouting facts at people is not an effective rhetorical strategy. Additionally, you'll see that it's counterproductive to suggest that people would agree with you if only they had the facts. Because the facts are always up for interpretation, and those interpretations or opinions are what really shape people's actions and attitudes. The facts are a good place to start, but the opinions are where all the action happens. So, to review real quick, an opinion is not a bias. Biases are unreasoned and unreasoning. You can't have a real conversation with a person who's biased. But opinions are nothing to shy away from. In fact, we can have much more meaningful discussions and accomplish much more meaningful things when we embrace opinions and actually deal with real people over real issues. And of course, rhetoric is the best tool for that job. And rhetoric is what we're all about here. So I hope you'll stick around for more, and I'll see you again soon.